All right, so in this tutorial, we're going to take a look at just launching Unreal and also just the project structure of a typical Unreal folder. So when you do have the folder structure, this is just the project structure that you see here. This is usually, as you'll see once we launch Unreal, the folder that is created. So usually I would suggest that you place this in a location that you can take with you if you're traveling around or otherwise has a lot of space, because these files, this is just the basic one and it's over a gig. This does have some of the loader content, but if we open this up, this is the actual project folder that you're looking at that contains all of the maps or levels. And then you can see some other peripheral information. If I went into the content, which is pretty typical, you can see some of the projects that are in here. If you record any takes or movies, they could potentially be in this folder. So that's a good location to look if needed. And then there's some other more developers and different collections. If you're working with any mega scans or anything like that, you can also see the U map. So this is one of the maps inside of the project. So there is a difference between the map, which is one of the levels within the project, and the actual project file itself. So a lot of these are connected. So for example, if I just took this with me, it would not open correctly because it needs all of these files for dependency. So this folder would be the main folder that I would want to bring with me, and that has all of the connections needed for Unreal to work. So that's what that looks like. They're typically pretty large. Some of my students have had 12, 14, 24 gigs worth of information. So you are looking at a pretty large file. So I suggest, put it someplace that you can grow as your project grows. On your desktop, you will find a couple of different icons associated with Unreal. You can launch Unreal directly by selecting this, but I typically go through the launcher. So locating this, you might be used to this by playing other games on your PC. But once you launch this, the Epic Games Launcher, it will prompt you to log in. I'm already logged in on my computer. So you can see that down here, but you will need an Epic Games ID in order to access this. You can see over here to the left side that I am looking at the Unreal Engine, but I can also look at my library or look at the store. So depending on your preferences for how you launch this, you might be looking at something a little bit different. And once you select what's over here on the side, you can also select these top buttons here. So I'm going to come back over to the Unreal Engine to make sure that I'm selected there, which is the default for my computer. Here I can also see if I'm downloading any things from the store or an update for Unreal. So that section is there. If there are any settings that need to happen, I can affect them in here. This is also a place where it might tell me that there is an update for the launcher, which is separate from Unreal Engine, just sort of like the launch pad that throws you into the software or game, depending on what you're trying to do. And then of course you can select this to get into your settings. So up here at the top, this news section is a really good place to keep up to date and to learn anything going on with Unreal. And there are a lot of free tutorials as well as free files that you can work with. Notice here that you can jump into YouTube. There's a Q&A section that will take you to a website. Most of these will throw you to the website. Let me just push this over here so you can see that. So this is a really useful place. You can see here that it already logged me in because I'm logged in here. So that can be a really helpful place, including some tutorials for different things that might be of interest for you. So moving right along, we have some samples as well as the marketplace. These are kind of one hand washes the other with this. So this would be a good place to download different starter projects just to get an idea of, kind of mess around and learn a little bit more about Unreal. So it's already created for you. Many of them are free and hosted by Epic Games. If I jump over to the marketplace, this place is a little bit wider. So it does include some of the samples. However, it also includes paid content. And one thing to definitely call out here is the free content, specifically the free for this month. So Epic Games takes on a few. You can see I have many of these already, whether I'm going to use them or not. But this is, for example, a free modular Temple Plaza that typically costs $50, but for this month is free and sponsored by Epic Games. So huge to think about, but you can also, there's also permanently free. This is a great place to look for, different architectural visualizations, different things that are always free, which is really, really great. I do want to call out some of the, locations that you can work with, including the, where is it here? Megascans. And most of the time I would push you towards Quixel for this and just using Quixel, which is part of Unreal 5. So I'm going to jump over to the library, which is typically where I start off, if I'm trying to work in Unreal. So Unreal and library, and this will show you the versions that are installed on your machine, as well as, some recent projects and all of the things that I have downloaded, whether it's paid or free from the marketplace. So if you want to add a new version, you can always hit this little plus icon and then choose the version that you're looking for, and then hit install. It does take a while. I'm just going to remove that for now, but you can see here that you can look at just the plugins as well as launch the engine. So I would recommend, if you're working with virtual production in particular, there have been a lot of changes that take us to Unreal Engine 5 that are beneficial for virtual production. So start here, even if you have other projects here. So you can launch this. You might have, if you have a keen eye, seen over here that you can launch directly from, let's say you were at the news section, you can launch it right from here. So either or, I'm just going to launch it here to demonstrate the process. There we go. And then we get the Unreal project browser. So this also has the recent projects. I could have launched those directly from the launcher, but I just wanted to demonstrate some of the locations that are typical as you start a new world. So if you are opening a new or an existing project, you can always come down here to browse and then find, I have it on a separate, altogether a separate, hard drive here, or I guess SSD. But yeah, so I could find my project folder, open that, select the U project and click open. But I would, probably just launch that from the launcher rather than do it through this. But I just wanted to demonstrate how you might start with some of the default games. So I typically go through the third person or, one of these three right here, but do recognize that there's also film and video as well as live events, which can come shipped with some things that you might need, but sometimes it's just a little bit extra. So I'll just use this one just so that we can see it. And then you can see over here that you are going to be using the starter content. So sometimes if you know you need that, it is important to keep that. But if you know you don't need it, I would suggest unchecking this just because it can bog down the project structure. So once you decide here, then you can say where you're going to save this project folder, which would be this piece right here. And you can see here, it's going to save on my F drive in a folder called Unreal, and it will create a new folder, which will be my project folder. And I'm going to call it my project. Okay, so I'm just going to jump back to, let's see, I guess we can, I'm in 5. So I'll just use this learning kit and choose open. Okay, so now we have the Unreal Engine 5 open. You can see that there are a lot of things to kind of take in here, but we'll take it one thing at a time. You can see that I'm looking in a specific level here, and down here at the bottom, you should be able to see your content browser, which is basically like a Windows, Explorer for your project folder. So we are inside of the project at this time, and we could, this is a live environment, so I could also, let me open this up here, and I think this is on my F drive, so let me just get that over here for you. Yeah, so if I were to go inside of content here, we could see all of these. I think this is a different file. That's fine. You could basically go into, if it had levels here, right, you could go into levels here and see the same content. So if I added it here, it does struggle. It's better to add it through the the interface in here than it is to put it into the folder structure, just so that through import, it sort of puts things where they're supposed to be. So even though it is live, it is preferenced to import or otherwise work through the interface with Unreal. But you can see over here, organization is a big thing inside of Unreal. So if you are working with a map, right, you can see how it's, very much helping, to keep folders organized and, thoughtful and named and everything. And I will mention the naming convention. So this is a good example here, and I'll go ahead and use the settings. You can see that I'm looking at the tiles. I think they moved the little, maybe it's under here now. No, there used to be a little slider right down here in 4 point whatever that would allow you to change the size of these. Maybe it's in the right click. Nope. It's probably in settings. I'm just not seeing it. That's fine. Oh, here you go. So I'll just put it as huge so you can see that a little bit better on the recording. But you can see the naming convention is pretty typical. So using a capital letter for each, word, no spaces, no special characters, that kind of thing. If you are going to use a space, it is recommended that you put an underscore rather than a space. It's just better for the engine to process. So great. So that's the content browser. If I wanted to add anything into this world, I could simply right click and import or create a new level or a new material or whatever it is I'm trying to go for. And if this closes at all for whatever reason, I can always come up here to window, and it's in here somewhere. Yeah. As well as opening up other ones to customize my viewport. So window is a great place if you don't see anything that's on my setup. You can always find it here and then just navigate, push it wherever you want to have it in your interface. So that one got a little excessive because it now crunched the details, but that's fine. Let's take a look at that. Actually, I'm going to just close the content browser so that we can have this a little bit more. So over here on the outliner, this is everything within the world. Again, having nice folder structure inside of here is really, really helpful. So you can, select things in here and then it will highlight it over here. So here's a player button, here's the, the ground floor, etc. And then as it's selected here, you'll see the details of that object down here at the bottom. So do be careful. Sometimes different, setups, UI interfaces will truncate this part. And this part can be really important. So, when I was first starting out, that took me a little while to figure out. So hopefully you're in a better shape than I am. I do also want to call out that there are search functionalities here. So oftentimes if I'm working with cameras, for example, many of the default cameras are called Cine actors. So I could type in Cine here and then all of my cameras pop up. So that's a really helpful feature. Just don't forget to close out that search functionality or else that will still stay active. You can also see that search functionality here. So for example, let's say I'm looking for scale. I could start to type in scale and anything that has that parameter will be filtered out for this. And there's also some general filters. This is relatively new, so that's a nice detail to just kind of skip to or otherwise, filter out. So again, if you're not seeing something, that could be a very common mistake that you forgot to clear out your search, or maybe you just have the animations showing, and similarly up here at the top. The other thing I do want to call out for the outliner, which again is a running list of everything within your level, is that right here is the place to create a new folder. So, if I come over here to my place actors, you can see again, I can search for a very specific thing. I can also say the recently placed things or basics or just lights or shapes. You can see cinematics in here, which we'll get back to in just a moment. But let's say I put in a regular Cine camera. And you can see that here. If I want to make a folder, that's all of my cameras. And of course I should make that a capital. Then I would put that up there and we can find it right there. So it's alphabetical and you can change that within the settings here. If you want to, do whatever it is you're looking for, just notice some of those settings, for, the level itself. Moving over to our place actors, we just demonstrated placing a Cine camera actor into the world simply by clicking and dragging it into the world. So I'll just place a cube, which is very common, into the world, just by clicking and dragging it, and it creates that default right here, which I could double click to focus in on, or tap F on my keyboard to focus in or frame in on that selected object, which is really, really useful for navigation within the viewport. I would recommend getting used to the combination of the mouse movement as well as the keyboard movement. So if you place, if you're familiar with games, it's the WASD keys will get you kind of moving around, but I can also pan by clicking in on my scroll wheel. So that's a click in, not a scroll. The scroll will actually kind of step you closer or further. This is technically a dolly, although you might interpret it as a zoom. And then the right mouse button will allow you to just kind of tilt and almost like, shaking your head or nodding your head. And, depending on what you're looking for, you can navigate with just a very, very little, necessary. And then, clicking on the regular click and just dragging your mouse will allow you to sort of strafe in the world. So you can move around like that, middle mouse button, click in and go up, down, left, right. And then the right mouse button will allow you to tilt. And of course, the scroll wheel will allow you to also move in, although the clicking is a little bit more user-friendly in my opinion. Okay, so definitely getting used to that. And then I would recommend memorizing that hotkey of F to focus in on the selected object. Other things to take note inside of the viewport here, we can see the select object. We can see the select and translate object, which is what gives us this little gimbal. So I can click and drag this to place it anywhere. Okay, and these associate, if you're used to Maya or other 3D animation programs, this is W, E, and R, which are right next to each other on the keyboard. So W is move, E is rotate, R is scale. The other thing worth mentioning are these three little buttons here. They are engaged, which means snapping is engaged. So you might notice here that it is snapping to increments. It's not sliding between that. So this is snapping to the grid for translation at a degree of 10 whatever units. It's kind of arbitrary, but there it is. You can turn this off or make it bigger, smaller, and turn it back on with the click of a button. So if I turn that off by clicking on it, you can see this is much smoother. Okay, I'm going to hit Control Z to undo that, bring snapping back on, and just compare it as you see here. Same thing for the snapping on degrees. If you want, and this is, just, so I'll tap E to activate the rotation tool and start to click and drag that over, and you can see that it's moving at degrees, based off of its original position. And of course with scale, so I'll tap R on my keyboard. If I click and drag on the central QB there, it will do in all directions, but I can also relegate that to a specific dimension. Or if I just kind of move around here, and I'm an old Maya user, so I did hold Alt and click and drag to do that. So that's the same sort of Maya controls. But you can see here, if you click on sort of this cross beam between two, you can actually scale in two directions together, which can be very helpful at times, if you're trying to make a ground plane or something like that. So again, holding down Alt and regular clicking and dragging will just allow me a little bit more freedom to bring together two of the motions, which is tilt and location, versus just one or the other. Camera speed is here. So if you feel like your camera's moving way too quickly, you can reduce that, or too slowly, you can increase. And we can see some of the other viewport. So if you're into Maya, this might feel a little bit more like home. And you can see that some of these are more on the wireframe. Let me zoom out so we can kind of get a better thought process of the world. They're kind of linked together here. I'll switch that back simply by clicking once on here. And you can see that I'm looking through the right camera at this point. So I can come up here to the top and switch that over to perspective. And I'm back into the perspective camera. So here are the orthographic cameras if you want to look at those. The Cine camera that I created previously is also an option under here. So I could click on that, and now I'm looking through that camera, and I can move it to wherever I want to get the angle for the cinematic or for virtual production or whatever the case may be. This is a good example and a good time to demonstrate these wires or the game mode that's on here. So you can also tap, as long as it's active, right? As long as the camera is active, you can tap G on your keyboard. And I kind of say get rid of, right? So get rid of those things. That's a toggle. So anything that wouldn't normally be seen is hidden. That's the game mode there. And you can also see that the grid does disappear with that as well. So that's a nice little toggle. We can also do that up here somewhere in 5. Yeah, it's here. If you'd rather do that, F11 is another one that's really helpful. It will go kind of full screen on you, and that's F11. So you can just hit, escape to get out of that. If it's, you do that and you're like, whoa, which is totally fine. Also worth mentioning, you can, position your camera in a specific location and create a camera in that location, which is really nice. And I think that's pretty much it that I want to talk about up here. This is another location. Let's say we are looking through the left camera, but I don't want the wireframe. I could change that viewport to lit, unlit, or whatever it is I'm looking to accomplish with that. It's probably these first 3 that are most impactful. I'm going to switch back to wireframe because usually these orthographic views are a little bit more wide angle and looking at something else. Okay, and if you do have anything in particular that you're trying to get rid of or toggle on, you can go under this show map, and let's say there's, you don't want to see skeletal meshes, but that doesn't go away with G or whatever it is. You can always toggle that on or off with this show button up here. Also worth mentioning, underneath Windows, this is considered a viewport. So you could go under viewport and add a new viewport, right? So maybe I just want to have my camera, right? And not really mess with that, just tap G on that and leave that on my secondary screen while I buzz around in here, and that's not impacting what I'm seeing on here. And then I can customize this. This will, if I save this, it will remember the different layouts that I have. And as I open up that project again, it will say, hey, you had a viewport. Do you want to add that back to the UI? And you can say yes, and then you'll get this window back. So I'm just going to close that for now and continue with our this bar up here. So you can see right now we're in the select mode. This is a difference if you're used to Unreal Engine 4. This is a difference from 4. These used to be individual buttons, but now they made this into a flyout. So by default, it will be in select, but you could also go over to landscape mode and notice how this right or left side column changes. I'm just going to make that a little thicker so that we can see this a little bit better, depending on what mode you're in. So this is kind of equivalent to Maya. You have that drop down window in the upper left hand corner, and Unreal is just trying to tidy things up here as well. So you have the landscape foliage, the mesh paint, fracture, brush editing, and animation. So I'm going to go back to the select, which is where we'll spend the rest of the time for this specific area. And just notice that the adding to the project is here. So we get this often. Let me bring back my content browser here. I often do this, adding to the project in here, so I can be sure that it's adding in the specific folder that I want it to be, including adding a folder to navigate and start to, build that structure out myself. But you could hypothetically do it up here as well if that's, more convenient for you. You can also see if you are working with cameras and animations that you can add a level sequence or a master sequence through this button up here. Again, I typically do that underneath the animation menu set. So here's the level sequence, and then the master sequences in here too. I just can't quite pin it right now, and that's fine. Other stuff to consider. Oh, here's the play. So if you do want to play the level, through the real-time stuff, if you have simulations or anything, that's where you would hit play or, kind of control some of that. And the level sequence is a little bit different. There is a play button within that interface as well. Other stuff. Let's see, what else should we talk about? Oh, let's talk about plugins and setup. So in the setting here, you can see the world settings, project settings, and plugins. So these are 3 that are very worth your time in exploring. I'm going to jump into the plugins here for just a second. And we can see that this is the plugins, make that a bit bigger. And there is the search functionality up here. So if you know exactly what you're looking for, I do encourage you to do that. But do recognize that if you, for example, go to audio and search, I'm just going to search for live link. It's only going to search in what you have selected here. So it is worth, jumping back to all plugins. And if I try to go for live link at this time, you can see that there's a ton of plugins for that search term, but it is going to filter through whatever you have selected here. So that could be a little bit disgruntled if you're not wary of what you have selected. I'm going to jump all the way down here to virtual production and just talk a little bit about some of these. I do also want to call out the experimental. So you may have been used to grabbing some of the virtual production stuff from experimental, and actually remote session is still in here. So this is an important one that does not come toggled on with even with the virtual production template of the boilerplate. So this is one I will put on. Usually what I do is I don't even bother selecting it down here. So I'll type in virtual for virtual production and make sure that my virtual camera is engaged. And it's yelling at me because this is in beta. So it's saying, hey, this could create issues and blah, blah, blah. And that's fine. We trust that. And a lot of these plugins, you will have to restart the software in order to do this. I do want to call out the take recorder. This can be very helpful for virtual production. I'm not going to engage that right now, but it is worth mentioning that it is here. And you'll see that it does not have virtual in the name, but it is part of the description. So the search functionality here is really nice. I'm going to type in live for live link and just make sure that live link is engaged. That's going to be really important. And what else do I want in here? Live link face. Did I skip it? If you're doing any motion capture, some of the live link, depending on the solution that you have, is important. So live link camera, that's a new one I still have to play with, but there's live link face. I just don't see it here. The live link XR is another one that could be of use. But usually if you're working with a specific solution, the get me started videos will call out some of those plugins that you need. And then the other one is remote session. So typically I search virtual, live, and remote. So I'm going to type in remote here and just make sure that remote session is engaged. And you can always, click on these to learn more about them or read the description to get some more information about that plugin in particular. And basically what this one is doing, as it reads here, it says a plugin for Unreal that allows one instance to act as a thin client rendering and input to a second instance, which to me isn't really a necessarily helpful description. And basically this can help connect, whether it be via Bluetooth or wireless, via a connection, a remote controller. So in this case, I would be using this for, let's say, an iPad to control a virtual camera. So I would need this plugin so that that connection can be made. If I don't have this engaged, it's not going to give me the options in Engine to actually work with this. So it's worth, kind of seeing what you're, definitely check out the experimental. Let me clear my search credentials here and see if any of those, kind of sound interesting to you, or if you're working in virtual reality, kind of, work through some of these. You can see some DMX controller stuff inside of here too. Camera calibration is another one to call out. So the live link camera. And a lot of them are tagged for multiple inside of here. I already mentioned take recorder, and there's a couple other take recorder. Timecode is another one, the the synchronizer. This one is deprecated, even though it is in beta, which is just silly, but that's fine. So I'll go ahead and restart. And it's saying, hey, you made some changes. Do you want to save whatever you did? I put a camera in there and everything, so I'm not going to do that. So I'll just hit don't save. And it will relaunch for me, so I just need to wait around. Okay, so I lied. You do have to launch it yourself. So I just waited around for a little bit, and then I was like, I wonder why it's not relaunching. But that's fine. And once it I did launch it, it came up with the same, screens that I had in the last time that I saved it. And I also got this error message that's yelling at me about some package that it's supposed to be looking for. So it's looking in this folder and blah, 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 and it can't find some texture for some stairs. So I'm not too concerned about this, but it is worth, if you do see any errors, to just read through them and start to get familiar, even if it seems kind of scary, and try to make sense of it. That's the only way that you're going to be able to troubleshoot some of these in the future. And you definitely want to be able to troubleshoot some of these in the future. And it's probably just, it looks like the file type or that the file itself is corrupted. It's probably just not there, and that's absolutely fine. So, this isn't detrimental to me actually running this package. So I'll just choose clear and just know that that is an issue. Oh, it did relaunch. It's just, it just took it a while. That's so funny. And my plugins is still up. But now the plugins are engaged and I can use them within the level. So let me go ahead and close out the other one. So great. So that was the plugins. Let me move over to the project settings just so that we can get some eyes on that. And this is the project settings. Again, I'm just going to make that big and full screen here. And you can see over here to the side on the left, this is typically where I start and then move over to that the settings parameters. So in this case, it's helpful to look at, let's see, what do we want to look at for here? Target hardware, where are you trying to go? If you're, developing a game, this would be something where do you want to go desktop, mobile? Some of the, parameters that you had for starting your template project will be, defined previous to this. You can see movies in here. Rendering is another one that I think is really important. So I'm just going to jump down to that one. So certain things that might be helpful, depending on what you have open or like what you need and what you're trying to work with. And I will also call out again, I'm just going to go back up to all settings, that you can search within this. So if I again type in rendering, it's going to give me a ton of stuff that have rendering as part of the search parameter. Or if I want to do that, it's probably not really great for that one, but that's okay. This is another place where you could describe your project. So this is just in the description. So these are pretty easy: copyright, licensing, etc. So it's a good, soft landing for, it seems like a lot of things to think about, but it's fine. It's just a matter of going through them and making sense of them. You can see the editor here, as well as the platform. Oh, actually, let me go up to the asset manager. Well, we're not really do that. Animation is inside of here too, which is worth mentioning. Gameplay tags. Maps and modes is another one. So if you have multiple maps, in your game mode is another thing. If you start to get into blueprints and whatnot, you can see that you can change the startup map. So when you hit play, that you're actually in the map that you want to be in, and kind of, advance through it like that. Yeah, I think that's trying to see. Oh, here's some plugins. So I could go into Live Link if I had certain things from there that I'm looking for. You can see the virtual production is inside of here, or virtual camera. Okay, so most of this is just for the project itself, right? So that is different than the editor. So how does this project actually, work and, function? I wanted to see, there was one other thing I wanted to show in here. I'm sure I'll think of it. So, as soon as you make a change in here, it will be effective. So you don't have to save anything or anything like that. Some of these parameters, if you change it, they will force you to restart. So that's worth mentioning as well. So that was the project settings, and we already went through the plugins. So I'm going to jump up here to the world settings, which will open up this little tab here. Let me see if I can just close that. So this one, it's a little bit harder to see, I guess, because it's not a floating window. Just make that a bit larger here. These are more of defaults of how the world itself works, which kind of makes sense here. So you can see if there's a heads-up display or a HUD, physics, you know, if you need to engage physics here. If there's anything here that we should change. Yeah, most of what you do inside of here will be, you know, something, if you're into it, you're going to be watching a different tutorial. So it's, I think you're in pretty good shape there. Other things to consider. So let me talk a little bit about the camera as we start to add in some of the virtual cameras. And it is glitching out here on me. Okay, there we go. Just got fused to my mouse. So let me just make sure it's okay. Oops. Okay, there we go. So I'm going to come back over here to the place actors. Notice I am on the select mode here. So if you see something different, that could be the case. If you did close this, do remember that you can find anything under the window menu set up at the top. And I'm going to just come, I'll just what do I want to do here? I'll go over to cinematic for a second. Yeah, you can see that there's media here too, volumes, and all classes. So you can search inside of here if that's helpful. But I'm just going to jump over to virtual production as well as the cinematics. So because we have the virtual production stuff open, and we did open a, or I'm sorry, I'm in the learning kits here, so I won't have the virtual production, you know, kit open, but a few things I want to mention about cameras in particular. So if we populate the checkerboard, let me get in on that. Let me move this over. I got to do my Maya here. Right, we can see how that is functioning there. You can see the clipping plane is pretty severe on that. We see this simple virtual camera. Let me go ahead and delete this. I'm just going to select it in my viewport by clicking once on it under select mode and tap delete on my keyboard to get rid of it in this world. You can see the virtual camera 2 actor, the simple virtual camera. And if I jump over to cinematic, you can see that these are different. So this is the camera rig crane, the camera rig rail, and the typical sort of beloved cine camera, as well as the level sequences in here, which I typically, you know, do inside of the content browser. So I would suggest if you're working with virtual production that you work with one of these two, depending on your output. But let me just look at them for a second. So I have that one in frame. Again, I can come up here and say, take me to the simple virtual camera and let me look through that camera. And it is chugging through that. There we go. So now I'm looking through that camera. You can see that happening here, and you can see that I'm currently piloting this. So if I move, that camera is going to change what it will view in the world. So just clicking and dragging to kind of strafe through here. Whoa, I got like way, oh no, that's fine. I'm going to come back over here to the details, and with, oh, I have something else selected. Let me type in, I don't know what's wrong with my computer right now. So I'm just going to grab that camera. Oh, I have something else open. Let me close that. It's very sad. So I'm just going to grab that camera, and underneath the details of that camera, I can see that the simple virtual camera sort of as a group has this scene component, which has its own details, a camera component, which it has its own details. You can see the issue that's happening here, and the VCam component. So this one is completely glitching out on the camera component. You can see how those numbers are just going crazy. So I'm just going to reset that here and see if that works for it. And that's fine. It got corrupted. So I'm just simply going to delete it, which is fine. Sometimes that happens, especially with things that are working with beta. So it is just, yep. Okay, there we go. So let me get that back in the world and just move it up a little bit. And again, coming back over here, I did change this out a little bit. So if you feel like that's too small, it is a small target to hit, but I typically have a couple layers deep just because, you know, switching between some of these sub layers is helpful and important. And you can see that I also, you know, depending on what I need, I might actually rip this outliner off and put it on my secondary screen. So, you know, with that master node selected, the simple virtual camera itself, I can change the clicking and dragging on this number. If I don't want to, you know, be navigating that, sometimes for me, it is harder. It's almost like, you know, being glued to the camera like viewfinder on set and not stepping back to move the camera. I feel a little too close to the subject sometimes. So for me, it can be easier to simply use the navigation arrows, which again, we've activated up here, or even the rotate, because I feel like I have more control. This one is, the rotate on this one, I think is just very glitchy. Wow, that's bad. I'm just going to use a regular camera for now. But you can see here that you can rotate these, yourself, or input a number if you want a very specific number. I can also reset those values back to the default. Okay, and I can lock things together, specifically scale. So let me put it back at 0, 0, 0 world space. And I'll push this down to maybe about 40, so it's closer to the ground. Okay, other things to consider. So I do have the camera selected at this time. And again, I know that that's a Cine camera, so I can just type that in here and select it from the outliner. And then it's here for me. And again, just to demonstrate this, if I had multiple cameras in the scene, right, many times, this is going to be the case. You have different angles that you want to capitalize on. And if you know they're all named something, then you can type that in, or, if you put them all in a folder, you can type in that folder and then you can see it pretty easily. So I'm going to jump back to the number 1. You can see what I'm looking at right now from this camera's vantage point. We already talked about location, rotation, and scale. And down here at the bottom, I can start to see specifically some of the, the focus settings. So if I want a focus distance, I can actually, sample something. So I could say, hey, focus on this thing right here and sample that location or that object, or simply, dial it in myself. I will reset that at this time. And we can also set that to whatever we want. You can see, so that's the focus. Let me collapse that. The lens settings, if you're into that, as well as the probably most common will be the focal length and the aperture, right? So you can change that, and you can see here how it's going to try to solve that, even down to something like silly like 5, right? So you can have something that's, really crazy. The standard is 35 on a 2.8, but you can also change this, to be whatever you want, or if I really narrow that. Okay, so you can see that also. Yeah, so these are some of these are helpful for virtual production in particular. So constrain the aspect ratio or lock to the head mount display. You can see some advanced features in here as well. So it is worth to just kind of like scroll through this and see what the what you can do. This post process has been really fun for me in the past. So let's go ahead and look through that camera. This is camera 1. So here we are looking at it. And again, I'm just going to click once inside of this viewport and tap G on my keyboard to get rid of that game mode, or be in game mode. And again, I could do that here. And let me just close this out so we can see that a little bit better on screen. And I'm going to jump down to, did I miss it? Oh, I have the wrong thing selected. That would be helpful. So let me grab the Cine camera. And underneath post-process, you can see that there's a lens section here. I'll go under color grading just because I think it's a little bit easier to see. So I could correct the color temperature, whether it's the white balance or color temperature here, right? And then tell it that the temperature needs to be this, or the temperature needs to be this. And I can do this all on the fly. These are also things that I could animate if I were to do the animation sequence, the level sequence. You do have to engage these. So if you're not using them, I do suggest that you untick them like I've just done. You can also see that you have different saturation controls, right? And I can dial this in myself if I don't want to use that, or use the HSV, right, to do whatever it is I want to do. Okay, so that definitely impacts. So I'll reset that and then turn it off. And I'll let you play with some of these to just consider that. You have shadows, midtones, highlights, and then this miscellaneous, which is always fun. You do also have this film section, global illumination, reflections, rendering features, and film grain. I want to go back up to the lens because these can create some pretty specialized look. I think bloom is kind of you know, it can be helpful. I don't really have too many lights in here, so it's not going to really help. The exposure too. So if we, that's kind of drastic, but I think you see what, oh, did I reset that? Let me make sure that that is where it should be. Yeah, so that's one thing to consider. So just take a look at this. If I put it at something like -4 and I just turn this off, it does kind of flick back, but notice how, I don't know, I always like to reset it and then turn it off. It just feels a little bit cleaner to me, unless you're trying to save that value for something in particular. And then chromatic aberration. This has been something that's kind of interesting, you know, that you can adjust or what have you. Some of these values, even though there is on a slider, some of them you can dial up to whatever you want. So here it is at 10 versus 5. I'll try 30. Right. So just because it goes to 5 doesn't mean it has to go to 5, which is always a gamble. So I do encourage you to just be thoughtful with what you're going to turn up to like 11, but do, you know, consider that you're not always relegated to the slider that they give you. Other than that, for the camera, I think that's good. That's all I really wanted to show for this one. But you can also see for the camera that does have some of these, and that can be just really nice to focus on what it is you're trying to go for, but just make sure that you tick it back to that all, because it is like the search functionality that it will keep it like that until you switch it back to the original. You can see that happening up here for the outliner, which is both good and bad, but there you go. I'm just going to jump out of this camera by clicking on that. And now you can see that the Cine camera is down here. And as I move this default camera, it's not impacting where the Cine camera is, but it is right there, right? I was just in the spot for that camera. So great. So we've covered a lot in this tutorial. I encourage you to pause it, watch it again, you know, just try to figure things out, get up a demo world, fly around and have some fun.